Broadsword calling Danny Boy. Broadsword calling Danny Boy. Over. Can you hear
Is
me?
that
Okay.
like is that one of those things that you say to like loosen up your speech before you go on
No,
air? Or
no, no. It's
how now, brown cow.
it's a little bit like that. It's an old Richard Burton film. It was Where Eagles Dare. Where I think it was Where
What
Eagles
year did
Dare.
that come out, and were you alive when it came out?
No, I wasn't alive when it came out. I don't think so. Anyway, it was where uh, uh, Richard Burton and Clint Eastwood had to disguise themselves as German troopers during the Second World War, and had to get up to a particular high place in the German Alps to do something. And I can't remember what the story is or anything, but the whole point is that as Brits, we used to admire, as a generation, or my father's generation, sorry, they used to admire Richard Burton, who was very, very serious actor at the time, and his radio speak at the time was Broadsword, which was his code name, to Danny Boy. Danny Boy was he's communicating back to the UK. Broadsword, Danny Boy, over, and it was all very frightfully lovely. Anyway, sorry. Let's start.
I love every minute of it. I don't know if you caught that there was a subtle age joke in there, but then I immediately regretted it because I don't want to turn this into and Andy's old, Sean's too young, that weird dynamic. I don't want to start all that. But
it's before my time, dude. Give me some bloody respect, please.
Anyway, all right. Welcome everybody to Just Chillin', episode 3, I believe, 3 or 4, depending on how you start it. My name is Sean Hoffman. I'm one of your hosts, and across the pond from me is my good friend Andy Bell. How are you doing today, buddy? Or this
Hello,
week?
Sean.
It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been another week. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you, Sean. It's been another it's been another week in the dreary months of early months of the year, but yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
No complaints, except for I can't believe it's already February. 1 month down from this year is kind of just like, I know I say this every year, but I'm just shocked at how fast it's going, which is kind of cool because that just means we're one day closer to Celebration or season 2. You never know. But it's been good. It's been good. I've been staying busy and just bearing through the winter and all that comes with it.
Excellent. Yeah, it's a I'm sure it's the same with you guys, but essentially the first 3 months of the year you can write off and just get your head down and get on with it, and then all of a sudden the flowers start blooming, and we can start enjoying warmer climes and enjoying the new stuff that's coming our way, including time off.
Always looking forward to time off. Love time off.
Yeah, it's a gift.
It is.
So, are we going into the normal format of what's top of mind this week, and what news have you heard, and what's twitching your ears this week, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, let's we can go with that. I mean, just looking at some of the things that have been newsworthy this week. I know that we've had the unfortunate passing of Carl Weathers, which is very sad, not just for his family and the fans and everybody involved, but it's a rough take for the Mandalorian, like, and things like that. Not that that's the most important. I mean, I think it goes without saying, but it's very unfortunate. I know that we messaged offline and we're like, it's really difficult to have all of these like losses within a franchise that I personally love. Like we lost Carrie, we lost uh, Balin Skull. I'm drawing a blank on his name right now, and Carl Weathers and stuff. But I mean, I don't have a lot to say. It's just it's very sad to kind of have these kind of crop up and catch you off guard. But that's probably the biggest one for me this week.
Yeah, Carl's or was, sorry, is I mean it's a kidney punch. It's a hard it's a bitter pill to swallow. The guy was an all rounder, an amazing all rounder. I mean, Carl Weathers is Carl Weathers. Played the most iconic roles in some many different franchises across Rocky, Arrested Development, and of course Mandalorian, which is close to your and my heart. But it's sad when someone like that, who is iconically Carl Weathers. I mean, Carl Weathers is Carl Weathers. Passes like that because the guy is an icon and he is himself a meme, and it's very sad. And he'll be, I'm sure he'll be sorely missed, not only with us fans but also within the community over at Lucasfilm, because from the sounds of it, I don't know if you saw the tribute that Mr. Filoni gave to him, but I mean the guy was pretty iconic in the behind the scenes and the directorial role that he played as well. So yeah, it's gutting, but let's celebrate what he did give us in terms of his performance and his creativity, and look at that as a positive for the future of the franchise.
Absolutely. Any other news on your side of things that you can think of?
Yeah. There's a lot of noise about Alien Romulus. This new prequel, or sorry, this new Alien addition to the Alien franchise that's coming out, and it's I believe it's set between the original Alien and Aliens. Obviously, the former being the Ridley Scott production, and the latter being the James Cameron production, but there's something going on between there. No idea what it's about. I believe it's not. It's related to, but not associated with either productions. But I'm really excited about that because one thing I didn't tell you about, because it's been a long time since I've done it, is I went through the Alien franchise recently, and I went from top to bottom, all the way through from the original Alien, all the way to the prequels, or the recent prequels that Ridley produced recently, and also the somewhat controversial, should we say, Alien versus Predator spin-offs that came from that, which I personally love, and we'll go into that a little bit later on. I personally love because of the whole idea of mashing these two universes together as a concept. I think is gloriously chaotic in all the right ways. Did it land particularly well? We'll talk about that later on. But the point being is that I love that idea, and I've watched the whole thing all the way through recently in the advent of this, in the on the understanding that this Alien Romulus uh, 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 series was coming out, and so I'm looking forward to it. I've no idea what the premise is. I've got no idea, but I do understand, like I said, that it is separate to the actual individual films, but will use connective tissue to be able to kind of add to the whole Alien franchise piece, which I really love that kind of stuff, because yes, there are an awful lot of really good stuff, obviously the originals, but there's also a lot of good stuff that are in the sequels and indeed the prequels that add to that kind of lore, which actually, like, it may not be executed particularly well in certain circumstances, but the whole premise around the idea of this biological infestation, as opposed to something that's relatively natural, being the biggest threat to humankind going forward. I think, which of course humans being humans are trying to pervert it to weaponize it. I think is really, really interesting. So I'm looking forward to that in particular.
So I haven't heard anything about it yet, but and I've always been lightly like I've watched the movies, but I've never been like in it. But I similar to what we've talked about the last couple weeks with like Monarch and the Ghostbusters stuff, like I this just even hearing about this is it's exciting because I'm all for fleshing out any of these universes, any of these franchises, like even if they're not, you know, 10 out of 10, critically like critics rave kind of content, even if it's campy, like that's awesome. I more content in these franchises in these universes to flesh it out, and like especially when they don't take themselves too seriously. Um, like I'm not looking for hardcore canon, but just more content, building it up, fleshing it out, prequels, sequels, stuff like that. That's really cool, and I'll definitely be watching it. I mean, maybe not day one. I don't know where it's coming out, but it's
Well,
it's exciting nonetheless.
so it is a standalone film. Sorry, I should have done this again, the research before, but I think it's going to be set to land on Disney Plus the same way that Prey did.
Ooh,
So
I like that.
again, yeah. So Predator is also. I mean, you know, they're kind of associated by the aforementioned mash that I was talking about. So Prey was this the latest iteration of the Predator series, albeit it was kind of like I would say a spin-off, but a redefinement of the franchise for TV or as a TV film. And I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And I think it introduced a new breath of life into that franchise, which was so needed because it became it became this whole thing around big blockbuster after big blockbuster after big blockbuster, and unfortunately, the quality in my mind deteriorated over time because of lack of ideas and what they or lack of purpose. And what they did with Prey was they took the concept of the predator back to the origins in that it's essentially a species that hunts um, challenging other species or challenging races that are a good fight to have with. And the insinuation from Predator 2 with Danny Glover, I don't know if you remember it, was that they've been here for quite some time and they've been hunting humans as their prey or their trophies for quite a few years. Hence the reason why there was a pistol, an old flintlock pistol that was passed to Danny Glover at the end by the Predator King. And what I loved about Prey was that it used the idea of history and introduced some a really interesting, or sorry, a really for me compelling idea that let's have a look back in time and look at when the predators were originally hunting their prey or looking at challenges on Earth. Hence the setting in the 1800s, whereby they were looking at they were hunting the indigenous Americans on as being the kind of fundamental crux of the or pivot of the whole story. And I hope that the same kind of thinking has gone into this idea of this kind of bridging film that looks to be bridging the two original films that will provide a little bit more context around it. And I hope they approach it with the same kind of attitude as the same studio did with Prey, because I thought that what they did for the TV was brilliant. And actually, I would argue probably should have been released at the cinema. But I'm so glad it wasn't released at the cinema, because it meant that it was a lot more accessible to everyone and ended up being quite a delight to watch.
Well, especially with like I mean, I don't want to. It's kind of weird to phrase it this way, but when you say accessible on TV, it's like, yeah, I mean, I probably wouldn't have gone to see it if it was in movie theaters. Like there wasn't enough of a pull for me to go in and watch it in the theaters. But when I heard everybody talking about it and pulled it up at home on streaming, it's like, oh, this is awesome. Like talk about Prey specifically. It's like, oh, that was actually really good. That I can watch it on my own time. I'm not committed to taking the time to go to the movie theater, which I love. I'm a big movie theater person. But for the franchises that I know or the movies that I'm more interested in seeing, and I think that's one of those ones that it would have never had the acclaim or um, the the viral fan base to kind of drive me to be interested to go see it. But I'm glad it came out as streaming, and I'm hoping that more content is, I don't want to say self-aware enough to make those kind of decisions, but smaller budget. It could still be big budget, but it doesn't have to be a big movie budget and then lose money and have all the critics pan it at the movie theaters. Like, just come out on streaming when and then now I'm more interested in the Predator kind of Prey franchise or even Alien and stuff like that. Like it doesn't have to be this thing that's looked down upon from movies. Like, oh, it went to a series on streaming. Like, no, they can be symbiotic and help each other. Like now I'm more invested in that, and maybe would go see a movie in that franchise.
Well, we talked about the power of good storytelling at least for the last 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, it's good storytelling without the flashbang wallop that you expect from an Avengers moment, in a Me Too kind of film, is really really important. And think about our reaction to Monarch, for example, which was we went in with low expectations. We're expecting some big monster movie, sorry, some monster battle moments. We didn't get it, but what we did get instead was a very very low key but really really compelling character driven story. And I hope that, and that's kind of what they did with Prey, despite the fact that the Predator was very much there. But it was a really really good story, and the fact that there are these little 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 cherries that we can take from that production. In that, I mean, I love the background of an awful lot of the fact that they used genuine indigenous people to actors to take on the roles that they did, and that it felt genuine and it felt really really realistic, and it was at the right time. It felt like it was being filmed actually at the time that it was meant to be set. All that kind of stuff is, for me, in my current mindset around what I like and what I don't like, is probably more important than the VFX or the SFX. It's kind of doesn't have to be so big blockbuster stuff, as long as the story is fantastical, because that's what I'm into. But most importantly, it's a really really good story with really good characters, and Prey in particular, I really really enjoyed.
Well, good story is what lasts and what you
Yeah,
remember. Like, what's what you take away.
yeah,
Like, yeah, cool special effects and stuff are neat in the moment, or a couple days after watching it, you're like, oh, I mean, that part stood out, whatever. But the takeaway in the end is there a good story? Is it compelling? Does it make you feel something? Um, so yeah, I like the push and focus on character driven stories and deeper concepts, even that we're seeing in a lot of these franchises.
yeah, yeah. Don't agree totally, totally. So, my friend, what have you been doing for the last week? What have you been watching, or what have you watched? What are you in the middle of? Let me know, because I've got a bit of an update for you. It's quite a change from last week, but I'll let you go first.
So my update is a lot more extensive than past weeks, and it's for a specific reason. If you'll indulge me a quick background story, really quick. Um, a couple years ago, probably more than a couple, Madison and I discovered that AMC movie theaters here in the US, when it comes to Oscar time, they will do 2 weekend or a 1 weekend showcase where they will do back-to-back showings of all of the movies that are nominated for Best Picture. And so at that time, we thought it was a silly idea. So we went and we did it over the course of 2 weekends where they will play like 4 or 5 movies back to back in a movie theater. You pay for one ticket and you get to go one Saturday. You sit in a movie theater for like 4 movies back to back, and they give you like a lunch break in the middle so you can leave and come back, and they give you a lanyard and all this other stupid stuff. But I mean, it was exhausting. It literally killed us, and we kept doing it every year after that until we moved away from an AMC movie theater. But we tried to carry on that tradition, not the back to back part necessarily, but really kind of when the Oscar noms come out, trying to make sure we watch all of the Best Picture nominees, like kind of around the same time, this time period between when the nominations come out and before the Oscars, just to, I don't know, culture in the sake of culture, in the name of culture or whatever. And so we won't usually rewatch the ones that we've already seen. So like this year, we've already seen Barbie together. But over the course of the last week, we've been knocking out a bunch of them. Last week, you talked about Killers of the Flower Moon. We did watch that. I rewatched Oppenheimer. She watched it for the first time. I feel like those have been discussed to here and back on every podcast. So I'm not going to dive too deep into those, but some of the other ones that we watched were The Holdovers, which is like, I don't need a deep dive. It was good. I enjoyed it. It was kind of that retro flick, kind of budding relationships of like a grumpy old person and a kid, and trying to like that kind of trope and how they get through it. It was okay. I enjoyed it. I don't think it's going to win. Don't want it to win. The other one we watched last night was Maestro with Carey Mulligan and Rocket from Guardians of the Galaxy. Bradley Cooper. There he is. It felt like one of those, like this is the uncultured person in me speaking. It felt very much like that. There's always seems to be one that's like a Hollywood nod where it's like, oh, this is for the people in Hollywood and media. And it's like, this is honoring Bernstein and things like that. So it's at it's art. It's artsy. It's like it was good, but there's elements of like, you just kind of sit back and go, I don't think I'm smart enough for this. Like, I don't know if this is hitting for me. It was good. The makeup and the prosthetics and just the Bradley Cooper acting in it were phenomenal, but it didn't make me feel anything. And like, I there's a common thread here. I don't know if you've picked up on it. It's like, I want movies that like make me feel something or make me think something. And it didn't really do, it was an interesting biopic, I guess, in a ways, but the other one that I watched that was a total sleeper for me that I hadn't heard anything about until I watched it. We just kind of went in blind because we don't like look them up on IMDb or anything ahead of time or like read the descriptions. Like Madison doesn't do that for any movies ever, which is insane to me. But this one we just kind of press play, and it's called Past Lives. We watched it probably 3 or 4 days ago, and I'm still just kind of like in a state of like, I cannot believe. So the way that it made me feel, and kind of like the sense memories that it brings back for me. Not like spoiler. There's not really spoiler. It's just, it is what it is. It's kind of like a childhood love story kind of thing of like friends and like an introspection into love and friendship and like distance and like meeting people and things like that. But it does it in a way that is real, honest, like brutal in some ways, and just the story, the acting, and just the real power in it is what it doesn't say and what it doesn't explain. You just see it, and like it gives you the space to kind of like remember how you were maybe when you were younger, or maybe in your current state, or wherever you are in your life, and like what love and friendship and things like that mean to you. Like it gives you the time to kind of like feel it yourself without missing parts of the story. Like it's not fast paced, and it's unlike anything I've probably ever watched that's like that. Like I'm not a big like a rom-com kind of person, but it's not it's not a comedy. It's just here's a window into the lives of these people. I highly recommend it for everybody. Um, I think it'll win? Probably not. Like it's up against some pretty heavy hitters. But I do think it's probably the one that's made me feel the most and keep thinking of like, man, I've been there. I felt that way. I know, or like I could put myself in those shoes and like, it doesn't follow this, like you think it's going to be tropey. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a word, but you get to certain things and you're like, oh, this is going to happen, or you want certain things that follow the typical story beats, but it's like it just does its own thing. It's like, and it feels viscerally real. So yeah, Past Lives, it was really really good. But outside of that, oh, go ahead.
So no, I was about to
That's
say that sounds really cool, but most impressive is the fact that you do this in advance of the awards, whereas Lucy and I typically will watch what we like, and I'd like to think that we've got a relatively good judgment in that. Pretty much, let's say 2 out of 5. Well, certainly this year anyway. 2 out of 5 last year. Sorry, 2 out of 5 or 2 out of 6 films with, or 3 out of 6 films we'd pretty much cover that end up in the nominations, and then we'll cover the rest retrospectively because we won't know. It wouldn't have been on our radar. The fact that you're actively doing it before before the award ceremony, I think is actually quite. I think that's quite nice. It's actually there's something quite nice about that I never even thought about before. And I bet you, I put money on it. I think Lucy would love that. Would absolutely love the idea of. Do you realise that these films are out there? They're nominations. Should we have a look at them before they actually get done? So, sorry, get the awards go out so that we can actually think to ourselves who is more worthy. I love that. I really love that.
It definitely makes you know. I mean, because just to be clear, like this isn't the type of like people that I think that we are. Like we're not like award show chasers. Like it just happened to be like it really was about that AMC double weekend thing, and then from there it just became like it became interesting because we don't even watch the Oscars. We just look it up on our phones later, like, oh, who won? It's like, ah, oh, that
Yeah,
makes
yeah,
sense. Oh, yeah. And so it really kind of opened our eyes to the types of movies that get nominated. And just, it's all those like sleeper movies that are the ones that are, you don't normally hear
yeah.
about. Yeah, we've all heard of Oppenheimer and Barbie and American Fiction and things like that. But
I'll be
it's some of these other ones that are
yeah,
just wild.
yeah, but that in itself is really really it's nice. It's not about the thing, if you know what I mean. It's more about
Yeah.
your relationship with Madison. I mean, I wouldn't have known anything about anything everywhere all at once. Is that the right? Is that the
Yeah.
right?
It's something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have known anything about that film unless I'd heard it until I saw the impact it made at last year's Oscars, and I saw it again retrospectively, and I loved it. It's like, well, how the hell did I miss this? How the hell did I miss this? So I guess what I'm trying to say is I understand where you're coming from. You're not some sort of kind of wannabe media hack that's got a review of everything. You're doing it for your own self gratification, which I think is brilliant. I think it's great, and I never even thought about doing it in advance of the awards, which is cool. So that you have your own, you're going in with your own shortlist before it actually happens. I think that's kind of fun as well. I think it's really fun.
It definitely eats up a chunk. It definitely eats up a chunk of time. Like it's
Sure.
which is funny because I feel like we never have
Yeah.
time, which is
Yeah.
really interesting if I think about it. It's like we never have time until one of us, I won't say who, is like, I think the Oscar nominations are out, and then we suddenly have a ton of time to watch like 6 movies in a week, which is crazy. I might need to sit on that one for a little bit and figure out why that is. But outside of that, I did watch I keep this one short because there's not a lot there. I did watch Masters of the Air episode 3, still good.
Oh,
I think it's that episode 3 typical part where I'm like, when I'm watching it and when it's over, I'm like, yeah, I feel like it's missing something. But it's that feeling you get when you're in the middle of a weekly episodic, where it's like episode 3 out of 9 or whatever it is. It's like I feel like it's missing something. We're not really getting going. But then you see the preview for the next episode. It's like, okay, no, okay, it's episode 3. Episode 4 and beyond is when it really picks up. So I'm trying not to be too hard on it because I know I've only seen a handful, but it's getting there. It's definitely not the production quality of the Pacific and Band of Brothers, but it's also because we're watching it on 4K TVs and we have a different expectation now, and things like that. But it's getting there. I'm enjoying it. We watch it when it comes out. That's all I can really ask for. And so,
no, I get it.
Yeah. What about you, buddy? I know you've said you've been watching some different stuff this week, and so what's been on your television?
So last week, I mean, I think I spoke about having the TV to myself for 24 hours, where I binged the great and the not so great, and I had a good time regardless. This week, we had the girls back. Sorry, we had my daughters back for the weekend, which was lovely to see them, and we spent some quality time together, as you do. But they very much dictate what's going on, what the TV schedule is. So, out of the normal, should we say, the normal weekly stuff, we're carrying on. And by the way, I didn't add this. We're carrying on with For All Mankind. We're approaching season 3 now out of 4, so we're making some really good progress there. Still loving it, and I forgot to add, Lucy's joining me in this little adventure as well, and really enjoying it. Again, in most cases, she doesn't dig the same stuff I do, but she's liking it mainly because of the historical aspects to it, but also the kind of perverse skew on history, as we talked about last week. You know, the butterfly effect of what could have been, had circumstances been different, and she's really liking it. And the acting is so good that, quite frankly, it's a proper drama. Let alone aside from being a pseudo sci-fi kind of flick as well, a series as well. So that there's that. The other thing that so the girls came back at the weekend and we watched a lot of stuff that I can't remember, if I'm perfectly honest with you, because it was very much white noise to me. But that's not me dismissing what they're watching, but it wasn't my gig, so I kind of did stuff in the background, and it was my cue to cook for the evening and that kind of stuff. But two things really came out for me this week, or really underlined this week with weekend with the girls, was I watched Haunted Mansion, the new take on Haunted Mansion on Disney Plus, which none of us had seen before, and was kind of somewhat undermarketed by Disney Plus when it did come out. And I have to say, it's a really good film. It's a really good film. It's it's really well done. It's not a cheesy Disney flick on Disney film interpretation of Disney ride. There's actually a story there, a genuine story, and I do implore anyone that's not just into the ride itself, because I've never done the ride, because I've only done Euro Disney, so my experience with Disney parks is relatively limited. But the take on the story and the actors involved it's a really good story, and I'm trying for the life of me while we talk to remember the name of the lead, who I love already because I follow, or I love Atlanta, the TV series, and it's I'm trying to make sure I present his name properly. It's Lakeith Stanfield, is that right?
I believe so.
And he's he's already a king in Atlanta. But in this film, he really, for me, he's his own guy now, rather than being part of the crew with Donald Glover and the rest of the guys there. And I thought his take on the role was superb, and I really hope he gets an awful lot of um, primary roles in films going forward, because I think he's pretty awesome and very, very diverse, which you might not get from his take in Atlanta. But he's a really really good actor, and everyone around him in that film is really really good. So I really enjoyed that, and that was again the girl's idea, and I'm grateful, because I would probably have skipped it again on Disney Plus. And the next, funny enough, we were talking about Atlanta. Nice segue, actually. We started the first episode of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Uh, really good, really good, very different, really good, really really good. I mean, anything from Donald Glover in itself is going to be pretty talented. I mean, the guy is a multimedia guru and an extremely talented actor, but Mr. and Mrs. Smith is good, and I'm not going to give anything away, because I've actually only watched the first episode with the girls, but it's a very very different take. I never watched the original TV series, but I did watch the film, obviously with Brad and Angelina Jolie, and it's a very very different take on the Mr. and Mrs. Smith dynamic. In the film, you have Mr. and Mrs. Smith that are a married couple, and they just don't know that each other is actually a Secret Service agent or an assassin, and that's the take on the plot of the entire story, until they both realize that they're both kind of the same part of the same profession, and end up having to, or being forced to, fight against each other until their love conquers all that kind of stuff. Whereas in the TV series, Mr. and Mrs. Smith is a label for a Secret Service agent, in that there are many many different types of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. It's more like I said, it's a label or a pseudonym for a person's role within the Secret Service. Again, a married couple, albeit they're not in reality Mr. and Mrs. Smith. That's their that's their that's their AKA, and I really enjoyed it. And it's a very very different take. It's a really really compelling story at the moment, and I'm really looking forward to episode 2. And that's kind of what I've watched on telly. Nowhere near as extensive as last weekend, but we were busy because the girls were back, so life gets in the way. The only other thing that I wanted to bring up for your attention was between you and Chris Hall, you guys have got me into watching an awful lot of creators on YouTube, and we talked a little bit about it last week. And I've really, late at night, when we're in bed and it's that last read of the night, or whatever it is to get you off, I'm on YouTube all the time at the moment looking at different creators. And there's one creator in particular that I follow, which is Boylei Hobby Time, that I know you follow as well. Really really clever guy that builds dioramas, builds worlds, all this kind of stuff. And a spin-off, or a partner of his, or a friend of his, has this channel called Gamey Builds on YouTube, and he's a very similar creator as Boylei Hobby, but he creates a story behind what he's building, and he's got many many videos on YouTube where he's building these kind of steampunk kind of environments and technology as dioramas and models and robots and uh, everything you can think, and transportation and ships and walkers and the rest of it. But he's creating this story behind it as well, and he's kind of building in it as a side project. He's building this narrative called Beyond the Blight, and it's the most compelling YouTube I'm watching at this moment in time for two reasons. One is his amazing talent in building these things that or this world that he's building uh, in a miniature format, but also the story or the narrative that he's giving to these things that he's building, which eventually will come out as a book. His plan is that he's planning to release this world that he's building in physical format as a novel as well. Which whether it flies or whether it sinks is kind of neither here nor there at the moment, because the guy is just a genius, and the amount of commitment that he's putting into his work. And I know you in particular would appreciate his creative talent is just beyond me. And I just find it strangely fascinating. I could watch the guy for hours. So that's gameyy builds, gamey builds on YouTube, and I would implore anyone just to watch one episode because or one of his uploads, because it's fascinating stuff. It really is.
Yeah, we'll put a link to that in the description. And to add to that, like I tend to watch those a lot for multiple reasons. Those kind of channels. One, it's not just looking at what they're creating, but I think I get a lot of techniques from it. Just seeing how people, because like I'm not a painter, and things like that, but you learn how to take this like cheap products or just everyday items, especially when it comes to dioramas. Like, yeah, you can go to the model shop and spend your whole paycheck on products that are very specifically tailored for the thing that you're doing, whether it's like, oh, it's sand or rocks or little trees. It's like, but you can watch these YouTube videos and you just watch people take a stick from outdoors, and it's like, yeah, here's how I would convert this into a tree to make it look not just the right
Yeah,
scale, but the right colors, the weathering, and like, oh, put it in the mud and yada yada yada. And it's just like they have that creativity and that vision of understanding how to take everyday objects, 1-to-1 scale per se, um, and and translate them down, and here's how you do it with basic tools. And like, that's the stuff that I really take away from it, of put them in the old noggin in case I ever start going down the diorama path again, because I've built one. I have my ATST back here with my guys on it, and that alone was just like brain melting to try to figure out, like, okay, how do I do like mud and things like that without spending a fortune on products. And it's just amazing, the creativity, and plus it also fuels the addiction of like, I imagine it's similar to like with people who watch Twitch and like for playing video games. It's like, yeah, I watch Twitch when I don't have the time to play video games, but I can watch other people play it. I kind of get the same thing. Similar to this, like, I don't have time to invest into dioramas or hardcore model making and things like that. So I'm going to watch other people do it with amazing results because they're really good at it. And it's a more effective use of my time, maybe in the moment. Uh, but yeah, it's awesome. I'm gonna have to check them out. I think you sent me a link to it, and I opened it and I subscribed, but I haven't deep dived any other videos yet. So that's cool.
yeah. It starts off. His series starts off ba- relatively basic, as most of them do, which is, I like building stuff. I like creating stuff, and then he just had this, I don't know, epiphany, I guess, to just create some content or some narrative behind what he was building. And I just think the guy is extremely talented, and I will be buying his stuff when it is finally published.
Nice. I did just have a random thought about your haunted mansion stuff. You mentioned that you hadn't been there, and so I only watched about 50% of the movie because I watched it on a flight home, and I forgot to pick it back up. But it did seem really good the first half that I saw. Um, it's one thing I can take. I'm inspired to watch it now, finish it. what my major takeaway from it was, as somebody who did work in the parks pretty close to Haunted Mansion, it did a good job at balancing the kind of like Easter eggs of like, oh, that's from the ride, with an actual story. It wasn't just all cheese. But the thing that I remembered was, um, always going to find a way to try to get like Disney parks content into the podcast, just because. But if you ever do go to Disney World, specifically, I don't know about the other ones, they will sometimes offer a backstage tour. They have a lot of backstage tours that you can take on, but one of them specifically, I got to do part of it when I was a cast member because I won a random lottery and got to go. But they have backstage tours where you can go tour behind the scenes, the Haunted Mansion and other rides. They'll turn the lights on and you like walk along the track and you can go out on the dance floor and stuff. It's really cool. So if you ever get the chance, you can go to Disney World. Look into that. It's pretty neat.
I will be going. I will be going. I mean, my children are adults now, but they keep saying one day we're going to go, right? Aren't we, Dad? And I'm like, yeah, we are. When we are going one day, and so we are coming one day. I promise you. I'm ever so sorry. There's one thing that I've been watching that I watched. Sorry, and I watched it about 3 or 4 weeks ago, but I keep forgetting to mention it. And that is anyone that knows me from being a guest on other pods will know that I'm in love with the creator. Particularly, I'm in love with Gareth Edwards and the way that his guerrilla style of film watching. On Disney Plus at this moment in time, there is a making of the creator extra to the film itself, and I implore everyone to watch that. If they've heard me ever prattle on in my own world about how impressed I am with the way that the guy made it, because for me that is as compelling as the film itself. The guy basically made a what should have been a $200 to $300 million film. He made it for only $80 million, and the way that he did it, which I very, very badly typically talk about with both you, Sean, and others in our community. It's perfectly explained on this particular extra on Disney Plus, and it's only an hour or 50 minutes even. I do implore you to watch it because this is the fresh kind of filmmaking that really excites me, and in particular, I love Gareth. And while Rogue One is still my favorite of the new Star Wars productions that have been produced since the acquisition by Disney of Lucasfilm, I still would love to have seen what Gareth's own vision prior to the changes that were made and the great involvement, by the way, but the involvement of oh God, guy's name. Come on, help me out here.
Tony Gilroy.
Tony Gilroy. Good God.
I will say, I will jump in and say that I disagree with the fact that you speak about it badly. I personally enjoy your 20-minute monologues on other podcasts, but that's just my opinion.
Thanks, mate. But anyway, point being, get back to. I can't believe I forgot Tony Gilroy's name. I've got to stop recording it late at night, mate. I'm not good at this. Anyway, point being is, the creator making of. It's an extra on the film itself, Disney Plus. Watch it; it'll make you love Gareth even more. I promise you.
Nice. It's on my. It's in my my list or up next or whatever it is, but unfortunately, it's taken the backseat to the multitude of movies I've got to smash through. But it's definitely on the short list to watch, though.
Cool.
So what else is there? I think we've covered everything that we've been watching. should we dive into books and comics?
Yeah, let's do that. So, let me explain how this category or this discussion point came about. Last week we talked about a little bit about our collecting habits, and one thing that when we stopped recording, was I forgot to talk about the number of books that I have, both out on shelves and also in storage, that are noteworthy, because I read a lot, or I read a lot. And it's very much part of my collection. So we decided this week, if it's okay with everyone, we decided we'd talk about, what really fires us about the written word. And so we're looking at, this week. We want to discuss a little bit about books, comics, and anything in print, basically. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand it over to you first, Sean, about your experience in the written world, in the written word, in terms of, where you started, where you are at the moment, and where you're going with it, what your preferred medium is. Really, just give us your take on what excites you, in anything wordy.
I can jump in there. Yeah, so I think like most people, I read a lot as a kid. Um, then life got in the way. But then I will say maybe 10 or so years ago, I really got into it pretty heavy. Again, some of that had to do with where I lived. I had a lot of train commutes and things like that. It also had to do with the obvious, like, new canon Disney clean slate, and that kind of, I think, along with collecting, I think that sparked a lot of, like, okay, I can start clean again. It's like cleaning your house. It's like, okay, it's clean, and now I'm starting fresh. Like I can stay on top of it this time. Um, that was kind of reinvigorating in a lot of ways, and I think that clean slate was one of the big things that got me back into reading more regularly. Um, Specifically books. The comics came in a little bit later. Um, at that same time, like, I always had books and stuff as a kid, but I didn't really have the space for it. And that too has translated into adulthood. So I don't have a lot of, I never got the bug for like collecting physical books, except for like when I travel. Every time we go to like a national park or something, I will get like an Images of America or some kind of book from the national park about the history, because I'm always digging in deep for that stuff. And there's never a lot of resources. So you always find a very specific book from there. But for in terms of like fiction, Star Wars, and stuff like that, I'm a big digital collector. In those regards, my it's gotten excessive over the years, with my obsession with getting everything, like, legends, all of it, short stories out from magazines, the magazines, all that stuff. So my digital collection is extensive. The to read list is infinite. But I've tried to stay on top of. I've fallen by the wayside in a lot of the newer canon. I've tried to keep up with High Republic, which is really enjoyable, by the way. Anybody who's not read it, and if you don't have time, go check out Rick over at Jam Transmissions. He covers a lot of that pretty well. Saves you a lot of time. Um, but it's been a constant struggle, like with the books. It's like I want to read more, but like I'm sure like most people, it's, oh, I have a billion other things to do. But then I'll get into like waves, like the hyperfixation will kick in, and I'll just start smashing through books. Um, I would love to hear what your favorite, like your top 2 or 3 list, or like what are books that are really meaningful to you. I'd love to hear that. But that's kind of like my story. And in terms of comics, it's a similar thing. But I was never into them as a kid. I always found them a struggle to kind of follow. Like, I appreciated the art, but I was never able to like get into the stories because there wasn't enough meat on that bone. I've had a lot more luck in later years. Like recently, I've been trying to smash through the Dr. Aphra series now that it's just wrapped up, and I'm really enjoying it. But I would say not. I want more. I always want more from comics because there's too
Dr.
much
Aphra.
detail left out. Go ahead.
Dr. Aphra is something unique, though, isn't it? I mean, that is something that is a gift that came out of new Star Wars or new or new or that wasn't plugging, creating adventures for the sake of creating adventures between the timelines that we knew, and Dr. Aphra in my mind, and I've read them, and I would say that for me she's the most exciting thing that's come from new, well, since Marvel re-inherited the Star Wars franchise in comic format. I mean, it's the rest of it is kind of cool, but in most cases, with the exception of the High Republic, which I'm ashamed to say I haven't read yet, the rest of it is kind of plugging in the gaps from our heroes. What have they done between this point and this point, or this point and this point? Let's keep that continuity going, and it's been good, but nothing quite as exciting in my mind as Dr. Aphra, in that she is the modern anti-hero that I just freaking adore. And the fact that
There's not all
she's
the weird like tendrils like with the mainline
yeah
canon
yeah
Star Wars stuff. It's like they start introducing them into these weird scenarios, and it's like, yeah, that's now it's just weird. Like, but with Dr. Aphra, there's no connections. There's no
no
like
no no no
baggage
no
with it.
yeah, I mean, there's no consequence to what it should be. You know the the sacred the sacred content should be what's on celluloid. It's what's on film, and the I mean, it's not just the latter day Marvel stuff, but even the Dark Horse stuff was back in the day, when they had the franchise, was skirting on the edge of impossibility, or it kind of somewhat stretched the connective tissue between people meeting for the first time supposedly on celluloid, or on film, sorry, and there being an association with them off camera at some point. It gets a little bit long in the tooth in that respect. But now the Doctor Aphra stuff I thought was kind of groovy, and not only that, they made her extremely inclusive as an individual, which with my sick sense of humor, wound up an awful lot of people, which I find hysterical as well. And I love that. I love the fact that you know she's she's very, very different to what typical, I say typical, God, that in itself is a judgment, but should we say some fanboys would like or not like. And I think she's absolutely adorable, and I really do hope that they have the opportunity to make more out of her, either still within the comic pages, or on screen as well, which we'll leave for another day, because we want to talk at some point about the successful translation between games, comics, and cartoons, and novels to real action, which I think in itself is a discussion point. But yeah, no, I love Aphra to bits. I think she's awesome, and she's got these two killer robots as well, which also makes me laugh.
Just the ridiculousness of it.
Yeah,
Like it's self-aware. It's like it's ridiculous and kind of tropey at times, but it's self-aware and kind of fun. Um, to the Dr. Aphra stuff, it's like I know there's a big push for her to be like on the screen. I think it'd be interesting to see her in like animation first, because she's not going to get like a full length film, live action
yeah.
film. So it's like then there's
Yeah,
a niche of people who are familiar with the comics. Like bring her into animation somehow, and like somewhere like Hondo Onaka, like there's a love for that character and their personality. Like bring them in as a side character, give them more time, and let people really build up their familiarity and their love for him even more. That's what I would do if I were
I
involved.
100, if not 1000% agree with you. The only thing I would say is that I hope that by translating her into animation, then doesn't set a precedence on expectations as to how she should be portrayed
Yeah.
in real life. I mean, some of the stuff that I saw in particular on the way that Ahsoka was presented was basically around fanboy expectations that wanted the same as what was on as a cartoon, or sorry, as an animated series. It's like, well, you can't, apply some logic here, guys. You can't do exactly the same, both in
Well, I
terms
mean,
of the
yeah,
actor, but
there's always going to
in the
be.
same way. And we saw this. We saw the same, for example, with and not only that, we saw the same with Book of Boba when we saw Cad Bane in the flesh, as it were. I thought he looked great, and is he going to be the caricature that he is in animation? Of course, he's not going to be. And there was an awful lot of backlash from that. And I just hope that people, if to your point, I would love for Afra to be translated to animation and then translated to real life, because I do think that if you're looking at something new, and if you're looking at something that is low risk, so there's no expectations around it, Afra is a perfect segue for that, or your perfect platform. Sorry, take that forward without any kind of preconception as to how it should be, and because there is no precedence there. But I just hope that the business gets the opportunity to do that, because they have every right to take that to screen, because I think she's ace. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, to your point of like there will always be laser-eyed YouTube thumbnails that are complaining about
Yeah,
the translation of animation into live action. I just like you just hope it doesn't get a foothold and and bring everybody down with it.
yeah.
That grass isn't going to touch itself, but it like I'm hopeful. Like I'm hopeful that like they stick with the character and like stick with like her look and dynamic and her origins and things like that. I think it'd be really interesting. It's like it doesn't have to be as over the top as what the comics are all the time, because I think that's where I would fear the translation happening, where like the comic only has so many dialogue boxes. There's only so much nuance, so everything always seems like it's a boiled down version of people's motives,
Yeah.
character, and dialogue, and the way they act. So on paper, Afra is just this an insane like Han Solo 2.0 if you want to be like follow a trope, but it's like they can have nuance, and I think that's what I would fear of people being like, this isn't Dr. Average, she's just she is a sarcasm 100 4,000% of the time. It's like, no, they can have depth, you're just taking it from a comic. But
Well, who does
she's
she
a really
think
interesting
she
character.
is? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you see how skinny her arms are? She can't do that in a fantasy universe. Blah 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 blah. It's like,
It's
anyways.
it's it's so boring, isn't it? It's so dull.
But I do enjoy
So
the
dull.
comics.
Yeah.
What about you? What's your backstory,
Oh,
Mister?
crikey! Yeah. Well, I think I talked a little bit about it last week, which is the reason why I was gutted we didn't discuss it any further. So, as a kid, up to sorry, approaching the launch of A New Hope in the UK, I started subscribing as a kid to the original Marvel comic run of Star Wars, which eventually got weird and beautiful in all the right areas over time for the first, at least 4 or 5 years. So the original Marvel comic run, which um, was amazingly bizarre. I originally subscribed to, and then as I got a little bit older, while I was keeping on with the original Marvel comic run, I subscribed to 2000 AD. We talked about a little bit about it last week, in that it was a bit of a more mature comic uh, that gave birth, as we said, to the characters like Rogue Trooper and Judge Dredd, a whole bunch of other characters as well, and spin-off stories like ABC Warriors, in particular Strontium Dog. There was an amazing interstellar galactic bounty hunter called Johnny Alpha in that he's essentially a mutant. It's a bit like an outer worldly version of the X-Men, in that there's a bunch of mutants out there with amazing abilities. One of which is sorry, of which an awful lot of them can be used to for nefarious means, or they can be used for good. And the majority of those mutants that are used for good end up being part of this bounty hunter crew that go through space and time, and they travel through time as well, to put things right, and they use their abilities to be able to take down the bad guys. That was a good one as well, and it was, like I said, there was a more of a mature take on that, and I kind of loved that. There was blood, there was real blood in these comics, and I really enjoyed it, despite the fact that it was still in black and white in those days. Then got into novels in a big way. I would say I'm approaching like 10 or 11. Got into novels quite in a big way. Started obviously from a Star Wars perspective, had all the novels and the spin-off novels, which was relatively limited at the time. There was the Adventures of Han Solo. So there was Star's End, Lost Legacy, and another one, which I can't remember at this moment in time. And at the same time, there were three Lando Calrissian spin-off spin-off stories. I'm trying to remember them, which is the reason why I'm procrastinating, and I can't remember them. But they became what were the Chronicles of Lando Calrissian, or the Calrissian Chronicles, which made me laugh. And I know that there's an awful lot of hate towards Solo, but I loved Solo because it was so on the nose. It was so obviously on the nose. It was brilliant for me, for all the right reasons. So when Lando's, while Lando's on the Falcon waiting for the heist to go on in the spice mines of all the spice mines of Kessel, he's talking into the hologram about the Calrissian Chronicles, and recapping the was it the Storm Cave of Thrumboka? Well, anyway, the point being is that there's all these stories that I got to know as a kid, which seemed completely out of context of the main story and the amazing space opera, which was very grounded in my mind between A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, and these ridiculous stories, which at the time were like, this doesn't feel in any way like Star Wars, because it feels like more like science fiction than Star Wars, but I love it because it's Star Wars. There was that. Then as I grew up, I started just investing in other books as well. So, for example, things like, as my palette got a little bit more mature, I'd start reading Asimov or Huxley. There were the original take on 2001 Space Odyssey, 2010, and its sequel, which I can't remember what the date is. But the point being, I started reading that as well. Read the Tolkien, the original Lord of the Rings, after obviously reading the easy one first, being The Hobbit, and just got into more and more fantastical and more heavy going books. Although a lot of them I've gone back and read again. Although I have to say I've only read Lord of the Rings, the three of them, once, because they're heavy going. They're really heavy going. One thing that I'd say about Tolkien is that on screen it looks amazing, but it's quite a heavy read as a kid, and I'm talking about in my teens still, but I'm still a kid in my mind. it's quite hard that in that there's an awful lot of reference. Tolkien was really into his study, really into his reference material. And he goes into an amazing amount of detail, which typically I would love, but it goes so deep you can get really lost in that and then lose the way of the story. And he jumps around an awful lot as well. So I found that quite difficult. I'm glad I achieved reading it, but it was, in my mind, in my simple brain, I found it really, really quite hard. And as time went on, I moved off a little bit of the comics a little bit, and got into it's when the graphic novels came out. So things like Watchmen, and as we were saying earlier on, the mashups between we're taking Alien and we're taking Predator and we're going to stick them together. Dark Horse had the license at that moment in time. We're sticking them together. So I'm talking about late teens now, early 20s. And I started reading the anti-hero type comic like Watchmen, and then B, the kind of mashup popcorn stuff like Aliens versus Predator or Terminator versus Predator as well, I think it was. Or and it was also Batman versus Aliens. There was this whole kind of idea of let's take these 2 or 3 universes and mix them all together. I really, really enjoyed that. And in fact, I got an awful lot of them here. And then life kicks in. I got married. We got married very, very young, and you have children, and then things like, personal time kind of goes out the window. So I found myself not reading as much as I'd like, but I kept on buying the original Legacy Star Wars Legacy books, which of course originated with Heir to the Empire. So if you think about the original, if you like, bunch of books around the time of the original film launches, that was that. And then there's this resurgence in the 90s when Heir to the Empire and everything successive of that came out from the from Lucasfilm, and I bought all of them. And I say I would, at the moment I've got pretty much all of the original Legends books in hardcover, because at the time I thought these are going to be collector's pieces at some point. Little did I realize the actual value of printed fiction is pretty much worthless these days. But the point being is I pretty much have all of that, and I got to reading pretty much all of it until the New Jedi Order. If you don't know if you remember the New Jedi Order, where it started getting a little bit funky, they ran out of ideas. The Yuzong Vong started coming in, and it just got to a point where it was not only I felt I was dropping out, as well as I felt that the creators of the content were kind of losing interest as well. And I've still got 10 to 20 books that I haven't read yet, and I probably never will, because I lost my appetite after Chewie got hit by a moon in those books. But then subsequently, life goes on. There's a whole bunch of digital content I've got, typically with the new content. So everything from Aftermath onwards, I've got digitally. I haven't read all of it at all. I've got some of it both digitally and also as an audiobook, because until recently I did a lot of driving in my role, and so I'd find that I found, as an old man, I found audiobooks quite useful going forward, and spent an awful lot of time listening to audio. But it's not quite the same. But there are certain publications where the production is so bloody good that it's actually better than the written word. And then lastly, but again, I've kind of, life gets in the way, and I've fallen by the wayside when it comes down to an awful lot of the new content, despite actually having it myself. And then I would say that lastly, it's a bit of a renaissance for me, in that last year I went away on a couple of holidays, and I didn't want to read a book via my Kindle. I didn't want to listen to something, so I bought a bunch of graphic novels, old school graphic novels, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And then I went away later on in the year as well, and I bought another couple of graphic novels. So there I am on the beach or at the pool or wherever I am, and I've got this old school kind of book that I'm bringing out that's got the printed stuff, and I've loved it. I've absolutely loved it, and I'm not. I'm not. I think I'll do it again because I love the idea of not only having this renaissance of getting back the print, a comic book or a graphic novel back into my house, but the enjoyment of having it in a printed form wherever I am in the world and digesting it that way. I'd forgotten how much I missed it, and I absolutely loved it. In this case, the last time we took out, I actually bought the Firefly series on graphic novel. So yeah, I love Firefly as a TV series. It's unfortunate that the guy that created it is perhaps um, not the type of guy that that I thought he was. If what is said about him is true, but I think his content is great, and the spin-off graphic novels of that TV series is great. So I bought all of the spin-offs of the original series that were printed in as a comic in graphic novel format, and I spent 2 weeks on the beach basically sifting through the whole thing, having a thoroughly good time. And it wasn't just the content itself, it was the format that it was in as well. So yeah, I'm old and I'm going back to graphic novels, but I don't care.
I will say you're talking a lot about like physical copies of stuff. I will say I do have there is something about the tactile nature of like a physical book, especially for me when it comes to like coffee table books. Like I
Yeah,
have the like the what's it called, the Tashin Star Wars Archives books. I absolutely love those things. They're like a billion pages, and it's got every piece of concept art, like scripts, storyboards, photography from the sets and stuff. Those are I love those things. I love the like any kind of like art of, or like not the visual dictionaries per se, but just anything where it's somebody's taken the time and like collected a bunch of
yeah,
behind the scenes photos, any of those kind of books. Oh, I love those. Then I have to have those physical. Like those are like sentimental in that way. Like I have a, what is it, like a behind the galaxy book or something. I can't remember what it is, but it's a whole coffee table book like dedicated to like high resolution photography of like the models they used in Star Wars. I used it a lot for reference, but it's just incredible. It makes you, because you all seen the videos of like ILM blowing stuff up and things like that. But it's like, yeah, I want like, where's the like the photograph of it, like the high res. Like I want to see what it really looked like, not just see it zipping across on a line. And those kind of things are those are a passion of mine that I don't think I can ever get rid of. But
yeah, and they were few and far between back in the back when they if we're going back to Star Wars, there was a making of for pretty much all three films, and then on top of that, they had from Star Wars to Jedi, which was a kind of um, a wrap up making of that happened at the same time, and it was all very good and very curated for you to consume on the screen. But at the time, the making of books were very few and far between. They didn't exist. They pretty much didn't exist. And I would say the first ones that came out were goodness me. Trying to think of the first ones that came out. It was the likes of Sansweet and those guys that came out with just the original kind of thrown together. I mean, way before he did his there's a book that he did which literally is a scrapbook of everything that he'd collected in terms of the fan journey. but there was stuff that he used to do for Virgin Media, not the for those people that know Virgin Media today, but for Virgin Publishing at the time. And he came out with some really good compelling stuff. I've also got a paperback from the late '80s, which was basically a dictionary from A to Z on everything Star Wars, with an explanation and a very rudimentary drawing of what was what was being discussed. But there was very little of that until I'd say the resurgence of Star Wars content from which started, I guess, with Heir to the Empire. And then all of these companies, including Tashlin, came out with all these really good things, kind of cataloging and resurrecting what was going on in the background. Awful lot of the stuff that we hadn't seen before, heck of a lot that we haven't seen before. So yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of them as well. I had to temper my collecting in that area because I'd buy everything. There were things like, I don't know if you remember, there was not only the art of books, there was also the incredible cross sections where you
Oh, I
get
love
a
those.
cross set. Yeah, so do I, dude. So do I. And then
Oh
on
my
top of
god.
that, there'd be from concept to screen. On top of that, pretty much for every single. So you could pretty much um, get 3 or 4 books for every single new media that was coming out, and then they go back and obviously cover the original trilogy as well, and then they kind of messed around with the format a little bit when it got to Solo. I don't know if you noticed this, but
Yeah.
they got to Solo and then they messed around with it, and that gave me the opportunity to jump off, and I jumped off at that point because literally my shelves could not carry any more weight, and so I've been a lot more selective in that kind of stuff ever since then. But I have to say, the quality of some of the books to this day are phenomenal and amazingly good value for what you get. So yeah, those kind of reference stuff I've still got. Oh, dude, sorry, I know we're going on a little bit, and I will shut up. I promise you. I've got the one of the things that got me into these kind of reference books was there was a tabletop game. I'm trying to remember the maker of this, but it was the Star Wars the role playing game, and I'm talking about
Hmm.
the tabletop, the dice game,
Like the
and their
Imperial Assault kind
reference
of game.
book. The
Like, are you
Imperial
talking
what?
about
Sorry.
Imperial Assault, or one of the others, like the uh
No. No, these aren't with miniatures. These aren't with miniatures. These are literally a.
the
This is
RPGs?
way before. These are the RPGs. So it was the Imperial. It was the Star Wars source book, and all
Hmm.
for these old West End games that were way before the miniature games came out,
Hmm.
which are a lot more comprehensive and quite frankly more fun. But the reference books that came with them are phenomenal, and that was all we had way before after in the drought that was the gap between the end of Return of the Jedi and the beginning of the Phantom Menace. All we had were these reference books for this RPG, um, and I don't know enough about the RPG because I never played it. I was more interested in the content of these books, which would go into the backstory of Wedge Antilles, go back into the backstory of Lobaka, would go into the backstory of all of these bizarre, secondary and tertiary characters that we didn't know about that would be, if you like, part of this game. But I wasn't bothered about the game; it was all about the content, and it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Um, One day we should spend an episode on it because it's really good stuff. Anyway, sorry, I went off at tangent again, and
You
here
don't
we
have to
are again.
apologize. I love, like I said, I love hearing it. The tangents are why I do this. Uh, I do have to ask. I mean, since you have quite an extensive, it doesn't even have to be from your collection, but what would you say are, I don't even know if it's recommendations, like what are your books that, like, your top books? They don't have to be like the best of all time, but like, what are the books that like live in your head rent free, or like, are recommendations, or your favorites to go back to, or just like, what are some of those, the highlight books from your, I don't know, in your memory? Doesn't even have to be Star Wars, doesn't have to be sci-fi, it could be anything.
um,
on the spot.
No, it's fine. My favorite book of all time that I read after the film, you know, is Louis Paul Theroux, The Mosquito Coast. Um, Being an impressionable young man that loves Star Wars, I watched The Mosquito Coast with Harrison Ford, which is a great film. It's a really, really great film, and it kind of, yeah, Harrison Ford's Harrison Ford, and he's a character actor in that he plays Harrison Ford. Um, you know what you're getting when Harrison Ford's in the film, and that's the one film that, and I was going to say regarding Henry, but even then, I think this is better. Um, that is the film that really made me think, oh, he's actually a pretty good actor as well as a great action hero. You know, a movie star, Um, it made it impelled me to read the book as well. And I'd say that one of the I'm not saying it's the best book I've ever read, but the one I've gone back to more often than not, is The Mosquito Coast, by Paul Theroux. It's a really good story, and it's actually, despite how I feel about the film and how I feel about Harrison Ford's performance, it's significantly better than the film, and goes into a lot more about the guy's mind and where he was coming from. Um, in terms of um, no, in terms of fantasy book or science fiction book, Clive Barker, and I think it's, what's the word I'm thinking of? Is it Clive Barker in Magica? Oh, sorry, I let me do something else because I can't remember the book I'm talking about. But no, sorry. In terms of uh, other books, sorry, in terms of fantasy, um, I've always been a fan of Frank Herbert and Dune. Sorry, um, Frank Herbert's Dune, is, for me, was big boy sci-fi. So when I came away from Star Wars and reading Star Wars, and I read Dune, it kind of like it changed everything for me a little bit. And I still haven't finished the whole lot, believe it or not, because of course his son carried on after Frank Herbert died. Um, he's carried on with his own stories and anthologies from that, and I still haven't finished any of those, but I will do one day, I promise. And then when it comes down to comic book series, Watchmen will always be. Uh, Watchmen for me landed at the right time at the right place, and I know that a lot of folk don't necessarily think the movie is that great, and I'm okay if they don't think it's that great because it's not. It doesn't have the same vibe or immediacy as when Watchmen, for me at my age at the time, landed. And I would say there were two publications in comic book world that landed for me at the right time, at the age I was at, and the way I felt about myself, the way I felt about my partner at the time, the way I felt about life in general. There are two comic books that landed for me exactly at the right time, that made me really, really, really represented who I was at the time and the way I was thinking. The first is Watchmen, and the second is Akira. And Akira landed with me in a way that it blew my friggin' head off. And if you ask me to this day, what would be the most amazing book to, or comic book to film translation that you would love to see, it would be Akira. But my God, the risk of getting it wrong is so large. I almost don't want it to happen. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect
Does that
sense.
make sense?
It's like you don't
Yeah.
want the source material to be like, you don't want to bring everybody else into it and have it potentially be ruined and
Yeah.
take something away.
Yeah.
Like that, let that time capsule be what it is.
Yeah.
Cool.
So let me
That's
ask the
cool,
same
man.
question. What about yourself? What's, what is, I've spoken a lot. and I promise I wouldn't do this week. What about yourself? What's
I
influenced
have
you?
so there's a handful. So I'll start with the easy low hanging fruit. But my favorite Star Wars book is Lost Stars. It's young adult. It's an easy read by Claudia Gray. I love it. Like that's I've read a feels like a billion Star Wars books, but none of them I felt like had the depth and the character that Lost Stars had. And I'm not even a person who loves like that star-crossed lovers kind of vibe, but it was so it was a moment in time kind of thing. It was the lead up to Force Awakens, getting excited again, a different quality of writing. Like, I mean, I grew up on like the glove of Darth Vader and stuff like that. So having stuff like, I know there's a lot of criticisms of Aftermath, but I'm a young adult reading level anyway. So like I loved the Aftermath books. I loved Lost Stars. Those hit pretty hard for me. Um, if I had to pick recent a recent book that like a recent release ish within the last whatever years that's non Star Wars, I would say Nothing by Patrick Radden Keefe. It's that book is fantastic. It's about kind of like the Irish the troubles and the things in Ireland, and it's
Yeah,
kind of it's based off those stories. Fantastic book, loved it. If I had to pick a book that was another right time but older, I would say Cannery Row by John Steinbeck. That's I don't dive deep into the older literature. My
yeah,
my attention span doesn't hang with it, but man, that book hit hard. It was perfect. It was like right when I was moving out to California, um, to like the San Francisco area. So Cannery Row, Monterey, all that stuff isn't too far from that. And it was just like the right time, and it was perfect. I love that book. And I have a physical copy of that book that like I've written notes in of like how I felt, like how different parts of it made me feel. And like that's not something that I do. But it hit that hard. And I would probably say the book that probably, it's not like it doesn't affect my day to day, but it was a book that I read and wasn't able to put down and had more effect on me than I think any book ever has. Um, and I'm surprised I finished it because of how big it was. As a book called "And the Band Played On." It came out in like the mid to late '80s, I believe, and it's kind of a documentation or like a retelling of kind of how the global AIDS epidemic took over and kind of where it started and where it went, and like it just that peak in it, because we, like, as being somebody who didn't live through a lot of it, and I was
yeah.
born later, like just you kind of have windows into what it was like, and then reading this book that kind of covered a lot of it really in depth was eye-opening and kind of shocking to kind of the world that we live in at times. And I've always said, like, I'm interested to see you read that book that comes out like through that covers like the pandemic, like the COVID pandemic and stuff like that. Um, because it was just it was so it grabbed me and held me for so long, and like I've recommended it to others, and it kind of sucked them into. So it's one of those books that's captivating in that way. Um, Not necessarily a cheery story by any means, but it's you need that reality every once in a while. But those are probably
Absolutely.
my four big ones, that I can think of at the top of my head that I kind of carry in my back pocket all times. Um, but yeah,
What about the comic world? I mean, you have a library of content, digital content in the drawn narrative. What's really rocked your world in the comic world, if anything?
I think similar to some of your answers, I think some of the graphic novels, some of the bigger classic graphic novels, because I feel like are the ones that I would gravitate towards, because I feel like they have more of that meat that depth that I'm looking for in a story, where I want the details really kind of drug out. I've read the Watchmen graphic novels, and those are incredible. I can only imagine what it was like reading them when, like, at that time, like when they came out, which they are. I don't want to say they're of a time, but I can imagine they were more impactful when they released. Um, in terms of the comics that I've read in recent years, um, I've always really liked some of the shorter story. Like, I'm not a big fan of the longer running comics, because I
Yeah,
feel like that's where things just get squirrely and get weird. Um, it's like, oh, we got to fill a content, we got to fill an issue. Like, let's introduce an octopus person and just have it just be completely ridiculous. Like, it's not. It just feels like it's content for the sake of content. So like the short stories are the ones that I've always, or like the one shots, I've always thought were really interesting. Like I don't like C3PO, but I like the one where you learn how he gets his red arm. Um, I like the short Lando series and things like that. Um,
I think that's Chris Hall's favorite as well.
I believe so, and
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure he likes receiving gifts that are representative of C3PO with the red arm specifically, but I
yeah,
could be
without a
wrong.
doubt. No, without a doubt.
Yeah.
And
I keep my eye out for it.
there's actually a reason why I was asking, because I know that you quite rightly talked about Aftermath and Lost Stars as being some of your favorites, because for me, I agree. I mean, Aftermath in itself was the first. This is the first new canon we have from really really branching out, and the way that they dealt with the way that Chuck dealt with the content and the diversity within new Star Wars, I thought was phenomenal. It annoyed an awful lot of people, of course, which actually made it even more compelling for me to love it. But also, Lost Stars, I think, is actually one of the best stories that's ever been written in all Star Wars, on the screen, on the page, and in animation. I think it's fantastic. If you ever got the opportunity, and I don't know if you already have, there is a 3-part manga version of Lost Stars, and it is phenomenal. You've got it.
You talking
You've
about
got it.
these?
Okay.
These right
Yeah,
here?
yeah. I'm talking about that. Yeah, they might be the same.
These
Yeah,
are these them?
yeah. It's such a really, really tidy representation, in that they abridge the whole story, but they
Yeah.
keep the whole content of it together. And then, of course, you've got this amazing art on top of it. And honestly, for me, that is, whether it was last week or the week before, we talked to the idea about a multimedia experience. And for me, Lost Stars is that for me in the new Star Wars realm. And I still think to this day, it's one of the best ships in Star Wars across the entire 45 years that we've had. I think it's a wonderful story. And I love the whole kind of Back to the Future-esque kind of what went on in the background while this stuff was going on, rationale behind it. I love that story. But when they turn it into
side
manga, it's
stories.
awesome.
Oh yeah.
Sorry.
It's the side story stuff that we always talk about with like the content that we want. Where it's like
Yeah.
not everything has to be. Uh, I enjoy the Skywalker stories, but not everything has to be them. It's okay to be a side story that's like tangential, but like it doesn't have a direct tie-in, but it's close. It's the people in the
Yeah.
ships over there, and I thought it played that card really well. Of like, hey, they were there, but they didn't pick up the lightsaber and hand it to Luke Skywalker, kind of thing.
And
Um,
it was subtle as well. It wasn't a case of, hey, we're in the background waving. It was a
yeah,
case of they're fighting the same, or they're in the wrong place at the right time, fighting the same battles. And kind of the hero's journey the hero's story in the background is almost inconsequential as to what these people are going through. Their story is the main focus of the story, and not it's an aside to the main Star Wars story that we know today. No, I loved it. I thought it was really really well done, really really well done. And like I said, because I love manga anyway, a bit of manga anyway, the artwork in conveying that story is brilliant, especially if you're not into reading. If you're not into reading and you don't mind looking at a bunch of really, really great art, I really implore everyone to buy the 3-part manga series.
Good stuff. Does that about cover it for us this week, buddy? Do you think we should cut it there?
I think we're well over what we promised ourselves, but it's been a good conversation. It's been a really good
It has.
conversation.
It's been good stuff. And on that note, I'm Sean. This is Andy. You can find us if you're interested in finding us anywhere. Just go to our website at justshillin.com. Leave a voicemail. Send us an email or a voicemail. There's links to it on the website. We'd love to answer your questions. Leave us a review if you want. That'd be cool too. That's all I got. Do you have anything else you want to add?
Just stay happy, guys, and look after your loved ones. Take care. Till next time.
Bye.